so sorry.
Hi everyone, it's Vanessa. Welcome back to my channel Split Reads, and I'm going to be talking today about the books that I ended up finishing up in January, as well as like things that I started in January but didn't get to finish. And the first book that I want to talk about is a book I don't have, and that is Sarah Moss's memoir, My Good Bright Wolf. This is a memoir by a well-known literary fiction author, and in this memoir she details her relationship with food and anorexia that she's battled with her whole life, and kind of where that stems from, the intergenerational trauma that she suffered as well, which she ties to how her anorexia plays out in the world. This was kind of a really sad book to start my month with, if I'm honest. It is very, very dark. I think what makes this book an interesting memoir, or something that I would suggest that you would pick up, is that it treats the memoir genre in a new way, and I thought that that made it really unique and novel. In a lot of the memoir, she doubts herself, and there's kind of like this creeping voice in the back of her head that comes out in the text. You can see kind of her battling with herself between this voice in her head and like what her actual lived experience is. Another thing that I really liked about this book is how it used stories that are well known. Like, she talks about Jane Eyre, Little House on the Prairie, and Little Women, in how they talk about food and what a prim and proper lady is supposed to be doing in those books, the way that characters and stories are created and how women are portrayed in said stories. She has really interesting takes on that because she is an academic. You can tell that she's very well read and very intelligent. I do still think that this was a very propulsive and captivating read, and I do think that it's worth your time if you are interested in memoirs and you are okay with heavy topics like anorexia and mental health being discussed. I learned a lot and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I read Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. My main reason for reading this book is it's one of the books that my outreach middle school is reading, and so I wanted to read it to kind of have something to say about it. I think that when I come to Maureen Johnson books, I just have to realize that I'm not who I was when I read her when I was in 9th grade anymore, and I think like her characters stay very similar from book to book. I feel like you could very much put the main character in this book into the Truly Devious series, and also anything that Maureen Johnson even published in the 2000s and 2010s. They are all very similar in that they're really quirky teenagers. They're like socially awkward, but they're likable and easy to root for. That's like her calling card and like the thing that she does best. But I think that that's not really the kinds of characters that I want to read from, and I feel like their quirkiness sometimes is a little bit too much for me. This book, Death at Morning House, is actually a standalone novel, and the main character in this novel, basically in the first couple of pages, so it's not spoiling anything, burns parts of a house down, and she's kind of like run out of town in a way. So during the summer, she ends up going to Morning House, which is like on an island. On this island, there's like this huge house that people do tours because of the family that used to live in this house like 100 years prior. So it's kind of like a museum that they also kind of live in. Somebody dies and they're trying to figure out who did it, which is going to be like one of the people who are there. And then it's also interspersed with the story of the family that lived there and the mysteries that that family also has. So yeah, it's like 2 different mysteries that are still kind of connected. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I liked it. I don't have any like big qualms about it, just not really my cup of tea. After that, I read a tiny little book that actually I've had out on Libro FM for such a long time, and that's Clutter: An Untidy History by Jennifer Howard. And this book is actually kind of something that took me by surprise, how much I ended up enjoying it. It's like 3.5, 4 stars. This book is an untidy history in that it looks into the history of clutter. It talks about like mail order catalogs and like post the Industrial Revolution, how much just more stuff we're able to get into like what it is now with like Amazon and what you can order. You can order anything online, it'll be on your doorstep in 24 hours, and how that convenience also just clutters up our lives. She talks about thrifting and decluttering and goodwill, zero waste lifestyle. She talks about Marie Kondo and like her movement, just how much stuff Americans consume to feel good. It's a way for us to like unwind a lot of the times. It's a way to signify status, and it's a way to fill voids for unhappy aspects of our lives. This is more thinking not like buying stuff that you need, but more so like buying so much stuff that it takes over your whole house. She talks about the word hoarding and also like nicer ways to talk about people with hoarding tendencies and having more empathy for people who are going through those clutter and decluttering loops in their homes, and how hard it is to kind of sometimes break away from those tendencies. And she does this also by looking into her own mother, and it's a memoir in parts as she is clearing out her mother's home. So she talks about junk haulers and like people who come and organize and help you, and she does a lot of services in that vein to fix up her mother's home. I think it was a really insightful little book, and it talked about things that interest me. I often think about the things that take up space in my home and what kinds of things I want and don't want in my home. I'm a big thrifter, so those sections were also really interesting to me, and thinking about just the convenience of online shopping and Amazon. It was really good on audiobook as well. And another fun thing about this book is that she lives in the area that I'm currently living in, so it's like interesting to hear her talk about the spaces nearby in kind of the Washington DC and Northern Virginia area. The next book that I finished was one that I was reading on my Kindle, and that is Liar by Sarah Manguso. In this book we are following the disarray of a marriage, many years in the making, a marriage that was kind of founded through not a great relationship, and then how the woman in this relationship felt kind of stuck in it through having a child and basically needing her husband to be able to kind of go on in life, and what that did to her writing career, what that did to her viewing herself as a mother and a provider, and basically how she had to take care of her husband's rash decisions, moving them all the time, just like emotional immaturity from this man. I ended up on 3 stars for this book. I think that there's a lot of it that is very repetitive, and it's also hard to really sink my teeth into it because it is full of vignettes. Every paragraph is like a different little thought or idea, and it's kind of putting them all together to understand the minutia of this relationship and how all of these little instances of not having a great marriage kind of stack up on top of each other, until she's like so far in, she's like, I'm gonna wait until my child is old enough that I can divorce this man. It was more interesting after the relationship ended and seeing her think back and try to make a new life for herself. I wanted to just feel her story more, and I think that's also why it took me so long to finish this book, is that vignette aspect of it and feeling kind of far away from them. After that, I finished Annie Bot by Sierra Greer, and this book I listened to on audiobook. I thought the audiobook was really good. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. While there were things about it that I did not like or that I thought could have been better done, overall I found this to be a really entertaining and thrilling and thought-provoking book about what happens when a robot AI machine basically becomes sentient enough and is believable enough to be a real human. So in this story we're following Annie, who is a bot who is with this guy named Doug. She starts off kind of like as someone who cleans up after him and cooks, and then she becomes kind of also this sex robot for him. And it's about how the technology is getting better and better, that they basically become a real couple, that when they go outside into the world, nobody can tell that she is a robot. As time goes on, slowly Annie starts to feel more and more like a real person with her own thoughts and questions and desires. And I think really the point of this book is to think about a woman's place in a relationship. It's to think about a woman's freedom, agency to do what they please versus to please men. This would be like a really good book club book because you could really talk about that for a long period of time. Obviously, we're rooting for Annie here. We're not Doug fans, but just like that push and pull and what that means for like actual humans and actual human relationships. Do we see ourselves in Annie in any ways as women in this country? I think that would be interesting conversation for sure. There were problems in this book when it came to pacing. There are parts of this book where I felt like the story was going to take a different route and then it went somewhere else completely. I just wanted like Annie to escape, and I thought that it would go somewhere with that because there's like a part in the middle of this book where things kind of change. There's a lot of interesting questions here too about sexual assault and is she able to give consent. So definitely like watch for those conversations because some of them are hard to read. Ultimately, I think Annie is a really easy character to root for, and that is mostly why I wanted to finish the story. I wanted to know what happened to Annie. Then I finished The Werewolf at Dusk and Other Stories. This is by David Small. This is actually a collection of 3 stories. I think one is an original story, and then 2 other stories are like grabbed from other pieces of text that then he illustrates and makes his own. David Small is one of my favorite illustrators and graphic novelists, but I have to say this kind of disappointed me. I would not read it again if I knew what it was now, because these stories are short. I don't think that the stories themselves are strong enough to be independent stories. He is more capable as a long narrative storyteller. I also just felt like the main ideas of these stories too, they didn't hit as much as his previous books have hit for me. He talks about aging, he talks about Nazism and anti-Semitism in some of these stories. There's one whole story where he's like talking to someone who might not be real, and then there's like ginormous spiders. I mean, it's been kind of a while since I read this, so I'm not sure if I even remember what the point of that spider story was. There are some really interesting panels, and his art is evocative, and it kind of stops you in your tracks to really pay attention. Yeah, some of his drawings are ugly and unsettling, moody. I did like how it was, a lot of it was just full page illustrations with a little bit of text. I think it's the stories. The stories didn't really land for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. Let's talk about my last graphic work. This one is also a graphic novel, and it's also like little snippets and stories. It's not like a full narrative arc. And this is Blue Sky Through the Window of a Moving Car by Jordan Bolton. You know, every couple of pages, it's just another little look into everyday slice of life interactions that we have out in the world. The main point of this book is really about the little things that we do and taking joy and being grateful for those little things. Some of them are a little bit saccharine or a little bit corny, but ultimately they are short enough and the things are so ingrained and like everyday experiences that I still took away something from that of like, yeah, I've had those thoughts. What I read about this is that he wants to be a filmmaker, but he did not have the money to make a film, so this is kind of where he went instead. And I think that's an interesting foray. I think that he did a good job. The illustrations, they're like all computer made. They were simple, crisp, and clean. There's not a lot of faces, and I think he does that with the sense of like you can place yourself in these characters and what they're thinking. So I would call this a nice palette cleanser in between all of these books. It's just something nice to pick up that's kind of different. It's nice and short, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. My next book is The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards by Jessica Waite, and I was really excited about this book, and it didn't really live up to my expectations. I did end up giving it 3 stars, so I just thought that it was going to be like a 4 or 4.5 star book. Part of it is that the book does not live up to the title and to the first couple chapters. The way that you're brought into the story is that the author's husband passes away at an airport. Then she discovers like all of these hidden secrets that her husband had behind her back. She could tell that her husband has always suffered through some kind of mental illness situation, and especially the more they get into their marriage, the harder it is for them to be on the same page. So when the story starts, she kind of is dropped into this bomb of figuring out what to do with getting his body back and trying to get all of their affairs in order, and realizing like he was living a double life basically. He cheated on her with lots of different people. He had a porn addiction. He also had a drug addiction. Seemed like he was going through his own internal demons and did not seek the help of his wife or like mental health professionals to help himself. They also have a child in this marriage, and it's her turmoil with herself about wanting to make sure that her child still views his father as someone to look up to and someone to care about, and that she cares about him as well, but knowing that their whole marriage was essentially kind of a lie in a way. That's why she calls this, you know, The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards. She really lays that out in the first couple chapters, and you're like, wow, like what kinds of things is she gonna discover? Like this is gonna be a look into all of the things that this man has done and all of the ways that he has hidden that from her. She does reveal a lot of aspects of that marriage and kind of how it slowly disintegrated and the things that he did behind her back, but mostly this is just a general grief memoir. I just thought that this one was going to do something a tiny bit different, and it really kind of didn't. It was very much like we had a very difficult relationship, and now with his death I'm really grappling with the things that I loved and did not love about this man, and her trying to pick up the pieces after his death. The rating of it on Goodreads is 3.57, so I feel like a lot of people had the same kind of reaction as that. This book was billed as something that it's not. And then I have just one more book to talk about, and that is a book that also kind of disappointed me, and that is A Passionate Mind in Relentless Pursuit, The Vision of Mary McLeod Bethune. This is by Noliwe Rooks. It is a book that I thought was going to be a legacy and a history of Mary McLeod Bethune, who was an educator and a pioneer post-Reconstruction era and before the modern civil rights movement. She grew up in Florida, so that was really interesting to kind of hear where she came from, and I just wanted to learn more about the person. Honestly, that's what I really wanted to learn about. So definitely I'm still on the market for a Mary McLeod Bethune book, because this book really was about the author thinking about Mary McLeod Bethune. So the author comes from a family that grew up nearby and crossed paths with Bethune, and it's her thinking about what Bethune means to us today. It's like really short, and most of it is little stories that are not chronological. Mostly it's really talking about legacy and what statues mean and what we think about when we think about Mary McLeod Bethune. It's not really a history of her and all of her accomplishments from beginning to end. It's more like little things that Rooks thinks about because she is an educator herself, and she grew up in the places where these statues are being put up. For that reason, I rated it 2.5 stars. That's it for my books. I wanted to talk really quickly about cookbooks that I'm reading and cooking from, and also books that I'm currently reading that I started in January but I didn't get to finish, and kind of where I'm at with those. So for cookbooks, I'm going to return. Every season is soup season. I've been really enjoying this book, and I think it's time for me to give it back to the library. I think this book is really fun because it's not just about making soups, it's about how to use those soups leftovers for something else. I'm the type of person that when I cook, I don't want to eat the same thing like every day for a week, and I get really tired of leftovers. And this is a good way to reimagine your leftovers. Since every season is soup season, she goes through the seasons and she talks about, you know, like this is what kinds of things you can make in the fall, and this is how you can twist the soup into something else. Pretty fun, and also really simple and not very many ingredients, which I also appreciate, and every page has a picture, which I also appreciate. The other book that I'm going to return, I didn't cook very many recipes from it. It's Plant You Scrappy Cooking. I follow Carly Bodrug on Instagram. I get a lot of ideas from her cooking on Instagram, so I wanted to check out her book. I think a lot of the recipes on here are not necessarily things that I love, or like the flavors don't really call to me. Her whole main idea is like, don't leave anything to waste. I do really enjoy how she has like all of the ingredients with pictures too. And then let's talk about books that I'm currently reading that I started in January but did not finish and why that is. Intermezzos first, for sure. I'm probably 50% of the way through. I was reading this on my Kindle and then I was listening to it, and then I only had like 4 hours left on the audiobook, which by the way is really long. My audiobook hold went away and I haven't really picked up my Kindle version since then. I think I am going to wait for my audiobook version to come back. I have my Kindle currently set on airplane mode, so I still have the Kindle version. I'm enjoying it, but I don't know if I'm a Rooney girl. I think that's what I'm deciding. Is her writing style the one for me? I definitely understand how she's like the millennial voice. I don't know if she's the millennial literary fiction voice for me. I'm definitely enjoying the chapters with Ivan and not really enjoying the chapters with Peter. And I think that's what was stopping me, is every time I came to a Peter chapter, I didn't really want to read it. So anyway, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of Intermezzo at the moment. And then last but not least, I'm also reading Rejection. I'm really enjoying this book. I'm only on the 2nd chapter. I just got to a part where like I noticed how they're connected. I really enjoyed the first chapter, The Feminist, and it was like exactly my kind of humor. Comparing it to Intermezzo, it's like this is the millennial fiction for me. It's more making fun of millennials. So thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you read any of these books or would like to read any of them now that you've heard me talk about it, I would love to know down below, and I hope to see you again in my next video. Bye bye.